This time last year, the Chancellor said this was a one-off, that she wasn't going to come back to us with another massive tax-raising budget. Are you really saying that in the last 9 months, everything has changed?
You're sort of encouraging me gently to get into speculation about the budget, and I realise...
Well, I mean, she's relatively candid that it's going to be a tough budget.
Yeah, but we know, as I say, the global situation is difficult. We have the fastest growing economy in the G7 in the first half of this year. And look, we don't...
What was the number?
No, not... Look, like...
It's about 1.2, 1.3% if you're lucky.
We know we want to go further.
But that's not good, is it? Hello and welcome to the Fourcast from Labour Party conference in Liverpool. Well, yesterday Keir Starmer unleashed his big attack on reform, accusing their policies, but not the people, of being racist. Today it is two big themes, the economy and home affairs, which we expect to be a lot to do with immigration. But with me today, the new Chief Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray. We've heard a lot today from Rachel Reeves about how the world has changed. And we assume this to be the build-up to why there need to be tax rises in the autumn. I mean, how has the world changed in an unforeseeable way in the last few months?
Well, I think it's just self-evidently the case that the world is more unpredictable. There's more instability. There's obviously a lot of stuff going on with global trade in the world that is different than I think people might have expected a few years ago. And actually, if you look at, for instance, what's happening with gilt yields and the upward pressure on borrowing costs around the world, what that underlines for me is how important it is that we have our fiscal rules in the UK, that we have stable public finances, because actually having that tight grip on public spending here in the UK is a key way to bring down inflation and bring down the cost of borrowing in the UK. So in a way, the fact that the world has changed, the fact there's instability around the world makes it even more important that we provide that stability and those firm fiscal rules here in the UK.
But I'm not talking about what was foreseeable a few years ago. I'm talking about what was foreseeable this time last year. You know, we knew that Trump was going to be around, that we're going to be trade wars. There's been a war in Gaza for a long time and a war in Ukraine. Wasn't all of the instability that we see now entirely predictable?
Well, I think that when you look back in retrospect, it's much easier than seeing it from the other side. And I think that the combination of different sources of instability and insecurity around the world, I think mean that the world is a less stable place and there is more instability. And as I said, that has an impact on Britain. Like we are subject to global pressures. And the question is not can we wish them away, because obviously we can't. It's how do we respond as a government, and that's what Rachel set out to do.
I mean, it's the old sort of when the facts change, I change my mind as well, isn't it? And I suppose what that means is we're looking at a tax raising budget. Obviously, we're not going to get anything in terms of detail, from you today in the same way we haven't from the Chancellor. But this time last year, the Chancellor said this was a one-off. That she wasn't going to come back to us with another massive tax-raising budget. Are you really saying that in the last 9 months, everything has changed?
Well, look, you're sort of encouraging me gently to get into speculation about the budget, and I realise...
Well, I mean, she's relatively candid that it's going to be a tough budget.
Yeah, but we know, as I say, the global situation is difficult, and we're going to have to respond to that, and that's why it's more important than ever that we stick to our fiscal rules and that we have that stability in the public finances. But look, a big part of the budget, which we don't talk about as much, to be frank, in media interviews, and I can understand why you ask the questions that you do, but a big part of the budget we don't talk about is what we're doing to boost growth, and why the investment that we announced in the budget last year is so important to that growth, why the planning changes that we made are so important to getting Britain building, why all that is so
don't talk about growth as much. I mean, this time last year,
let's talk about growth.
It was all about growth, and growth is still around 1%, and that's pathetic in global terms.
You want to talk about in global terms? We have the fastest growing economy in the G7 in the first half
what was
of
the number?
year. And look, we don't.
What was the number?
No. Look, we want to go. We want to go further.
Fastest growth in G7 sounds good, but what was the actual growth?
Well, we'll see where it is by the end of the year, because we know that
it's about 1.2, 1.3% if you're lucky.
But look, the point is, we know we want to go further, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to say for a second.
But that's not good, is it?
I'm not going to say for a second that we're happy with where growth is. We want it to go. We want growth to be higher. We want to go further and faster, and that's what drives us.
What do you think is a reasonable expectation for growth, for a government that really wants growth?
Well, as high as we can get it. I mean,
which would be what?
I'm not going to set a
2%,
target.
3%.
I can see what you're tempting me to do here, but I'm not going to set a target on that because we want to go at growth with all possible avenues.
Yeah.
And that's why, so look, number one, we know that investment has been too low in Britain for the last 14 years under the previous government. That's why if you look at what happened to the budget last year, massive increase in investment, 120 billion pounds of extra investment from the public sector in energy, in housing, in transport over the course of this parliament. That then brings in a lot of private sector investment. Look at the 150 billion announced from the US that they're going to be investing in Britain as well. So that investment is a crucial part to getting economic growth going, along with the reform, and the planning system is the best example of that.
But what we know is that despite that growth, and it is modest, you're going to be looking at another tax-raising budget. Now, last time around, you did a budget that gave you £10 billion of fiscal headroom, and it turned out that wasn't enough. If you do the same this year and create another £10 billion of fiscal headroom, you're going to have another 12 months of speculation about the next tax-raising budget. So you're going to have to surely create a lot more headroom this time than last time.
Well, one thing I've learned in a year and a bit of being a government minister in the Treasury is that it's very hard to dampen speculation about the budget. And I think no sooner do you get through one fiscal event, almost literally the same day, people start speculating about the next one.
So I think that's speculation. I mean, that more headroom means you take away that feeling that it's not big enough, it's too tight, they're going to be coming back for more.
It depends where the OBR forecast comes in, it depends what the analysis of that is by the Treasury, it depends what measures the Chancellor announces on the budget day. There's a lot of factors in play there before we get to the final announcements in the budget this year. But what we need to do is make sure what the Chancellor will make sure she does is stick to the fiscal rules, because you've seen at every turn that's been so important for her and for the economy.
But that's the other thing a lot of people question, though, isn't it? That you said the world has changed, and that was your perfect opportunity to say, so we need to change in a big way, not just by raising taxes, but by looking at the fiscal rules. And you missed the chance to do that.
I disagree, because I think the instability in the world makes our fiscal rules even more important. If you've got the instability and insecurity globally, and that has an impact on our economy in the UK, it makes it even more important that we've got a tight grip on public spending.
We're still seeing very high borrowing
fiscal rules. So the fiscal rules say that day-to-day spending has to be paid for through tax receipts, and that when you borrow to invest, debt has to be falling as a proportion of GDP. And those fiscal rules are even more important now. And I think it is worth considering what's the alternative? Because if you start tearing up fiscal rules, if you don't meet the fiscal rules, if you lose control of the economy, we saw what happened 3 odd years ago with Liz Truss.
But that's not the only option, is it?
Well, no.
The choice isn't Liz Truss or where we are now.
We also know that if you look at the situation that we inherited, with debt being around 100% of GDP, that's a lot higher than it was in, say, 2010 in the UK. In the UK, it was about 65% of GDP, got up to around 100% over the course of the Conservatives being in office. If you compare us to Germany, Germany's around 65% of GDP, actually, so we've got a lot higher level of debt to GDP ratio. And if you look at that situation, and then you look at what's happening, as I said, with the global forces on borrowing costs, that's what means that the fiscal rules are even more important than ever, to make clear to the markets, to make clear to everyone looking at the British economy, that we have rules about paying our way, about living within our means, about bringing debt down, and that we're going to stick by them.
But you've tied yourselves in, I suppose what I'm saying is, this very strict sort of straitjacket with your manifesto pledges on income tax, VAT and national insurance. And what that leaves you with is ways to get round it. Now last year you got round it by raising national insurance on employers. You're going to have to do other ways of getting around those pledges in this budget, aren't you? And don't you think a bit of candour with the voters about the situation we're in and what that might mean would be a good thing? I mean, it is perfectly possible that you will raise more in income tax by freezing thresholds. It's perfectly possible that you could take away some of the zero rating on VAT goods. You would still technically stick within your pledges, but you would be getting more in those main taxes.
Well, let's remember why we had that pledge in our manifesto. And the reason why is because people were feeling the squeeze of cost of living crisis under the Conservatives. So we wanted to go into the election with a really clear promise to people, which, yes, it means that it limits options and what you can do in other places, but a really clear pledge to people that we will take this really seriously in keeping taxes for working people as low as we possibly can. And that's a guiding principle for us.
Isn't it partly why people find a big trust problem with the established parties, that despite your pledge, and despite you technically sticking to your pledge, you take a tax measure that ends up costing people in real terms. It does end up being paid by real people, and whatever you do in the autumn will also be paid for by ordinary working people.
Well, let's look at one of the bigger tax measures.
So what I mean is, you can say we won't tax working people, but you do.
I can approach that question by looking at one of the key choices we made in the budget last year around employer national insurance contributions, and that was one of the hardest decisions we took at the budget. We knew it would have impacts on businesses in terms of them having to pay more tax. We weren't naive about that. That was why it was such a difficult decision to take. But the reason why we took that decision was to increase investment in the NHS. And actually, what people want, what people voted for us to do is, yes, to bring stability to the economy and the public finances, but also to get public services back on their feet. And one of the key services that we need to make sure is working is the NHS, not just for individuals and their families, but also for the economy. Because when you have record numbers of people who are economically inactive because of ill health, that's bad for economic growth as well.
The trouble is, you're now swimming in an environment in which the detail and a lot of the metrics, they don't seem to have an impact on political decisions. The polls right now are terrible for Labour because you've had this collapse in the Conservative vote. It's all gone to Reform, and if there was an election tomorrow, it would be a disaster for your party.
We're just getting started on our plan. We're just getting started with all the investment that we've agreed to and we've made possible through our fiscal rules. And people will start to see the benefit of that, whether that's in new homes, in new transport, new energy infrastructure, of course, the importance of defence as well. People will start to see the benefits of that. And actually, the biggest antidote...
It's looking like it's too late, though,
we're about, just over a year into what could be up to a 5-year parliament. And I think the right thing to do is to take the right long-term decisions and say, look, this is a plan that will take over this parliament, probably longer than a parliament to deliver, because it's a real...
But do you still think we live in a world in which, if you do improve certain metrics, the electorate will come round? Or are we past that? We're in this sort of new world where Reform can pretty much say anything, and they're getting support.
I think I don't really agree with you just calling them certain metrics. I think when you're talking about how much money people have in their pockets, how much...
It's got to be a lot for people to feel it.
When you talk about how people struggle to make ends meet, when you talk about people seeing the cost of energy bills, when you talk about people not being able to get a doctor's appointment, that's not just a metric. That's people's lives. That's people's daily lives. And actually, what they want a government to do...
But even if you bring £300 off the gas bill...
Credible long-term solutions to make people better off and to make life easier for people.
That's my point, that even if you do get energy bills down by 300 quid, do you really think that is enough to change the dial in a world in which British politics seems to be on its head?
Well, I think the British people are fundamentally... they want their government to do what they say they're going to do, and then they will judge them at the end of the parliament, right? And
are you sure that that's still the way that politics works? That's what I'm saying.
Well, I think if people can feel the difference in their lives, or they can see we're heading in a better direction, I don't think people expect us to solve every single problem the country faces in its entirety by the end of 5 years. I think people expect us to have made progress, so they can see the change in their lives. We may well go into the next election saying, look, we started, we want to carry on, this is what we want to carry on by doing. I think people want to see change they can feel, and that we're moving in the right directions. And I think when I knock on doors, in my local area, or when I go to other constituencies and help out there, people talk very much about their daily lives, about what impact politics has. And actually, let me just add one thing to this, which is, I don't know if you've seen, we've recently launched the Pride in Place programme, which is £5 billion over 10 years being invested into local areas. One of those projects, one of the adjacent projects is Southport Pier, and about restoring that to its former glory. Now, when I've been speaking to people here in Liverpool about that, people are saying, this is so good, this is brilliant, this is actually restoring some pride. This is not just talking about big numbers around the debt or GDP growth or whatever it is, sort of figures which people may struggle to connect to their experience of day-to-day life. They're seeing the impact of this investment, and they say, right, Southport Pier, the council's going to start repairing it next year, it'll be reopened, that will be jobs, that will be tourism, a sense of pride in their place. So I think that's really important for people to feel that tangible difference.
it's interesting. You still seem to have faith in the project, as was. There are people, even at conference here, who are losing it, aren't they? I mean, Andy Burnham's out there today speaking at various fringe events, talking about the need to tell a better story, the need to connect with people, the need to take on reform, kind of in their own terms.
So I think a good example about, you say, take on reform. So we've just discussed the importance of cost of living and about getting bills down for people. I think alongside that, there are other issues which matter to people, immigration being a key one. And I think what people want to see on immigration is they want to see the numbers of people coming into the country going down, and obviously the asylum hotels closing and the small boats coming down as well. Now, what people want, and I think, I really believe this strongly, in that British people have a sense of fairness, of balance, and they can see what's an effective policy and they can see one that isn't going to work. And I think when they look at our policy around indefinite leave to remain, where we're saying we're going to extend the length of time you have to be here to apply for indefinite leave to remain, and in order to apply for it, you have to have high quality of spoken English. You have to have not claimed benefits. You have to have contributed taxes to the economy. You have to have a clean criminal record. All of those conditions. I think people understand that is a fair sense of contribution.
Is it fair to ask immigrants to be better citizens than citizens? I mean, you're asking immigrants now to do things that most Britons don't do, like volunteering in their community.
Well, I think this is about indefinite leave to remain rather than citizenship. But I think being in this country, is a privilege, and it is something which should be taken really seriously, and people should make a contribution if they want to be part of British society.
My dad came here in 1962. He's a doctor, still works in the NHS now. I think when he was a junior doctor working 60 or 70 hours a week, staying up all night treating drunken, injuries. If you told him, if you want to stay in this country, you've got to go and volunteer as well, he might have been a bit insulted.
Well, no. What the consultation at the moment is about different forms of contribution. So I don't want to delve into your family's case in too much detail, but if someone were working, so many hours in public service and doing a great job or contributing to our economy, that is the kind of contribution we're talking about. So contribution can take different forms, and the consultation will set out the details of what we mean by that contribution. But the principle here is, in order to apply for indefinite leave to remain, you should make a contribution. Now, policy reform came out with a few weeks ago. It's something which, not only did it fall apart within a few minutes when people started asking questions about the detail of it, and it was based on dodgy numbers and all that kind of thing.
You're branding it racist, clearly.
But also, think about what it means. It means that people who are living in Britain, who maybe have family here, who have contributed to society, work in business, maybe started a business, they would be wrenched out of Britain. Like, that is a totally different thing, and that is way over the line into policy which is immoral and unworkable, and we can't support.
I mean, what are the problems you've got though on that front is you do now have a lot of reform supporters who are saying, and are being told by their leadership, if you're worried about immigration, they're going to call you a racist.
Well, no, I think the policy is what we were talking about. In terms of people generally in Britain and their concerns about immigration, it's perfectly legitimate for people to have concerns about immigration, and a lot of people do. And it's absolutely right for the government to do something about that. But we want practical, fair, firm and tough solutions, but ones that work and ones that are balanced. And I think people in Britain have an innate sense of fairness, and people can feel when a policy is landing in the right place, which is where ours is going, or when it's going too far and it's becoming unworkable and the wrong direction.
It's a bit of a bubble, a conference, isn't it? I mean, you're preaching literally to the converted. I mean,
that doesn't include all journalists, though.
No, obviously, but I mean, when you leave here and you're still facing those polls showing how far behind you are, how confident are you really going to feel?
What I've really felt at this conference is an amazing spring in people's step. And it's quite interesting in that a lot of journalists, I think, in the run-up to conference were, saying, I bet this is going to be a hard conference, and how are people going to feel?
Well, that's why I say it's a bubble.
I can put my hand, and not every conference I've been to in my life has been people have had a spring in their step. Far from it. There have been some conferences a few years ago which were really very difficult for the party. But I think at this conference, people understand that being government's difficult. They understand that we're not going to be popular every day of the week, and we're going to do things that not everyone likes. But people can take a step back and say, okay, take a step back from the day-to-day news cycle and look at what we've done in the first year or so in office, look at what we're going to do over the rest of this parliament, and feel confident about it. And that's why, hand on heart, there is a spring on step amongst people who are meeting here at conference.
Okay, James Murray, thank you very much indeed. Thanks
very
for
much.
joining us. That's the Forecast for now. Until next time, bye-bye.